So let's start with a little bit of wax remover. Let it soak in for a moment. And while it's doing that, we'll get ourselves some wiping paper and we'll just clean that stuff off and remove what little wax is actually on the surface of these skis. There's actually not a lot of wax left in these skis. As I said, they look like they've been badly neglected and they need some little bit of care. Some of you may be worried about the sanding process because it's going to change the quality of the surface of the skis and effectively roughen it up. Well, remember, we don't want the bases of the skis to be too smooth because if it's too smooth, it's going to create suction in the snow. So we want to restore the original stoned ground texture in the base of the skis by using the sandpaper. And if we use too smooth a sandpaper, the bases are going to be far too smooth. In fact, a medium grit sandpaper is going to give you the same kind of structure that they came to you from the factory with. And that's going to be ideal. And most of those superficial scratches in the base will be removed by this sanding action. So a lot of things that look terrible on your base will actually look a lot better just after the sanding process. And things that you think might require patching are actually not in need of patching at all once you've sanded them out of the base of the skis. So let's go ahead and continue this sanding process. Okay, long strokes. Trying to keep the sandpaper flat and even on the base, and keep the sandpaper tightly wrapped around the sanding block. When the sandpaper starts to clog with either fuzz or any wax residue, it's time to brush that out. And you can use your steel brush. Any material that's clogging up your sandpaper. If you're starting to fill up your sandpaper with any wax residue, that's going to be very difficult to remove, and it's going to be time to change your paper to a fresh piece of sandpaper. And don't be afraid to be generous with the sandpaper because it's your time that's valuable, not the paper. So let's continue. Now that we've finished sanding the bases of the skis, it's time to patch the major gouges that have occurred in the bottoms of our skis. How you assess the quality of the gouges in the bottom of your skis is kind of interesting. You want to make sure that the gouges in your skis are the ones that are deep and they run perpendicular to the running length of the skis. Any long gouges that run lengthwise on the skis are not that significant unless they start to get very deep. So the ones that we're going to address initially are the ones that are going to cause the biggest problems. And those are the ones that are going to change the directional nature of the skis because they run perpendicular or at an angle to the length of the skis. In order to patch the skis, we're going to need some very specialized tools. Now, these tools are not particularly exotic, but they are quite special. We use a specially designed soldering iron that has a flattened tip on it. And there are lots of different tools out there for doing this, but a low wattage iron designed specifically for patching ski bases is ideal. They're not particularly expensive, and they're well worth having, and they're certainly well worth learning how to use properly. This iron is quite hot, and we have to be very careful in the way that we apply it. The secret to doing a base repair is to weld the patch material right into the gouge on the bottoms of your skis. The whole process should not take longer than 10 seconds. So if you're applying the heat of this hot iron to the bottoms of your skis for longer than 10 seconds and you're having trouble in getting the patch material to flow into your gouge, back off and let it cool down and start over again. As long as the iron is clean and you're working quickly, you're going to do a reasonably good job of patching the bottoms of your skis. Liquefy the patch material in the area of the patch and sort of deposit a reservoir of patch material in the area of the patch. When the iron starts to smoke, it's time to clean the iron off. And I just use a metal brush to wipe the excess p-tex material. We don't want any of this scorching p-tex material to contaminate the patch area. Okay? So I've now deposited my patch material on the base, and now I'm going to apply heat to both the patch material and the area surrounding the patch where the gouge is in order to weld that into the base of the skis. And to do that, I just simply use the flat of the iron and press down, and this is where we start to count 1, 2, 3, and if it's longer than 10 seconds, back off and let it cool down. And then I'm going to bond that patch to the base by pressing down and running the iron over the area of the gouge and the patch, welding the patch material to the base, and back off. Clean the iron tip and go on to the next patch. By doing this, we will eventually patch most of the large gouges in the base of the ski. Once it's cooled, we just simply sand the patch flat and smooth. Okay? So let's do that now. Just sand back and forth until the patch disappears right into the base. And it's done. Occasionally you'll notice in the process of sanding the patch flat that you've exposed some little air bubbles or some gaps in the patch. If that's the case, you just simply go back and do it over again. Just remember, every time you redo an area that's been patched, it's going to get better. The next step is to finish the bases and eliminate the fuzz that we've raised in the bottoms of the skis by doing all this abrasive action with the sandpaper. The first step is to shave the fuzz off the skis, and we do that by running the scraper along the length of the skis, and you'll see that there's actually lots of fuzz right there. Okay, so run that in both directions because the fuzz has a tendency to lie down when you run the scraper over it. And remove the fuzz on every pass of the scraper. And this gets off most of the fuzz by running back and forth. The next step is to remove the rest of the fuzzy material on the bottoms of your skis by using a pad of Fibertex. And remember, Fibertex is this special abrasive material that we use for scrubbing the bottoms of our skis. Run that back and forth, and as we do that, you'll start to see that the fuzziness of the bases will start to get less fuzzy, and eventually it will start looking like a nicely polished base that will be ready for wax.